When John saw an issue the same way you did, you knew you had just found your most stalwart ally.
His life is a story of American heroism personified. But maybe most of all, he was a truth teller.
He always belonged to America and to the world. And now he belongs to the ages. Farewell, Senator. Farewell, John.
Those were senators paying tribute to their colleague, Senator John McCain. Joining us now to talk more about McCain's legacy on the U.S. Senate is independent Maine Senator Angus King. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning, Allison.
Boy, it sure gives you a lump in your throat to listen to all of the tributes pouring in for Senator John McCain. And beyond the personal inspiration, because you were on committees with him and have known him for so long, I'm wondering what will be missed now in the Senate with his loss?
Well, I think, and this has been commented on, he had two characteristics that were remarkable. One was an instinct for compromise and for finding common ground. That's what that final statement that John played just a few minutes ago said, that we are a country that has more in common than we have dividing us, but we seem to be focusing on the divisions right now. He was a person that reached across the aisle, most notably in my career here, on working on the bipartisan immigration bill, which got 68 votes in the Senate. I mean, what gets 68 votes these days? Didn't get taken up in the House, but he was one of the keys to making that happen. He understood how essential that was in a democracy. And one of the things that worries me, Allison, is that we're getting to the point where compromise itself is viewed as a dirty word, as something that you can lose an election over if you're viewed as being reasonable. That's number one. That was one of his great legacies, I think, that we all have to remind ourselves. The other thing that I haven't heard mentioned in the last couple of days, he was one of the few politicians I've ever seen who would admit mistakes. He talked about, in fact, in the final statement, he said, I've made lots of mistakes. I hope the good has outbalanced the bad. For example, in his recent book, astonishingly, he admits that his support for the Iraq war was a mistake. Now, I can remember as recently as 5 years ago, he was all still gung-ho about the surge and the Iraq war. That's an important element of humility, I think, that's an essence of real leadership.
Oh, he seemed to personify, I think, humility. I mean, Jake Tapper was asking him how he wants to be remembered, and he once again was self-deprecating and said that, he admits that he's made lots of mistakes. I mean, he's publicly admitted that his choice for vice president and his presidential bid was a mistake. He says things that are impolitic. I mean, that was obviously part of his charm. And so moving forward, what do you think will happen with, I'm thinking of armed forces and foreign relations, things that were so important to him. And of course, I'm thinking about that because of North Korea. And it seems as though whatever deal existed, if there even was such a thing, agreed upon with a gentleman's handshake between President Trump and Kim Jong-un seems to be falling apart. There's this secret letter that the Washington Post has first reported on about how it's from Pyongyang. They seem to want to, I guess, rewrite some of the agreement. And then, as you know, President Trump decided that Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, should not go back for another visit. So where are we?
Well, I think one of the problems is that this administration doesn't seem to want to remember history. This is the fifth time we've been in negotiations about nuclear weapons with North Korea, and the dance has been pretty much the same each time. They come up, they talk about making concessions and backing off. They get concessions from us or from the Chinese or from other people that are interested, and then they backslide. So this is not unusual, and I'm afraid what worries me is that the administration might lurch from excessive optimism to excessive pessimism and let slip at least an opportunity to keep talking. I think this is a long road, and it's not going to happen overnight. What worries me is that they're going to stop negotiations, and then we're back with some very, very unattractive alternatives. I think, John McCain was no slouch when it came to the use of military force, but I think he understood the extremely dangerous situation in North Korea, probably the most dangerous situation in the world right now, and that talks continuing towards some kind of goal and realistic goal in terms of timing and what we might actually achieve, that's what we've got to do.
Well, I mean, it sounds like those talks are falling apart, particularly since President Trump has canceled Mike Pompeo's fourth trip there just hours before it was supposed to happen. And so do you understand today what did come out of that meeting with Kim Jong-un and President Trump, other than elevating Kim Jong-un on a national stage, what the U.S. did get?
Well, it certainly did that. And you know, I was just pretty skeptical at the time, again, because I've seen the history unfold going back 25 years that anything really concrete was accomplished. To me, what was accomplished was simply opening a channel between our two leaders that could lead to something productive if Kim Jong-un is finally ready to say we don't need these weapons. But we've got to understand that they view nuclear weapons as an insurance policy. And frankly, I think our abrogating the Iran deal didn't do any good in terms of these negotiations, because if you're Kim, you say, well, wait a minute, I signed an agreement with these guys on nuclear weapons, and 3 years later, it's just thrown in the trash can. So it's a long process, and I think the president was overly optimistic when he was flying home and saying, you know, North Korea is no longer a worry. That wasn't the case. But as I say, what worries me is we'll go from that excessive optimism to nothing will work, no more discussions, cancel meetings. And then we're in a very, very dangerous place because there are no good options. I can tell you from serving on the Armed Services and Intelligence Committees there's no such thing as a surgical strike. This is not something where we want to face some kind of military result.
Yeah. Back to Senator John McCain's legacy. Chuck Schumer, Senate Minority Leader, has suggested that the Russell Senate Office Building be renamed the McCain Building. Are you in favor?
Yes, and by the way, I'm standing right now in the Russell Rotunda. The Russell Building was only named the Russell Building sometime in the late 70s. When I worked here as a staff member, this was called the old Senate Office Building, or affectionately we referred to it as the old SOB, and I can't imagine a more appropriate place to put John McCain's name. His office was just down the hall here on the second floor. I think it would be a great tribute to John McCain. And you know, sometimes you do change the names of buildings to make them more current, and I think it would be a living memorial, the work that goes on here, and perhaps occasionally remind us of what our obligations are.
Senator Angus King, thank you very much for being on New Day. Great to talk to you.
Thank you.
I have a building called the old SOB named after Senator McCain. That is an appropriate tribute.